Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my channel? Thank you so much. I didn't expect to be humiliated in front of my entire family that day, especially not by my own brother and uncle. But even more than the sting of their words, it was what my daughter did next that I'll never forget. It was a Sunday, hot, sticky, and loud. One of those classic family BBQs with folding chairs, cousins chasing each other barefoot, and the smell of charcoal and overcooked burgers hanging in the air. Everyone was there. Uncle Marcus, loud as ever, talking over people like he always does. Shane, my brother, all smiles and fake charm with that "I've got my life together and you don't" air about him. My mom was fluttering around the buffet table, making sure everything looked presentable, while Dad was manning the grill like he was competing for a championship. It was loud, familiar, but for me it wasn't comfortable. I hadn't been to a family gathering in months. Not since the divorce. Not since my ex stopped paying child support and I started juggling a part-time job in the morning and waitressing at night. There hadn't been time for BBQs or the emotional energy to endure the stares and questions I knew would come. But Nova, my daughter, had begged me to go. She missed everyone. She missed being part of something. And I guess deep down, so did I. We didn't show up empty-handed. I packed a small picnic basket, peanut butter sandwiches, fruit slices, juice boxes. Not fancy, but it was ours. I didn't want to take food I hadn't helped buy. I wanted to teach Nova that we contribute what we can, even if it's small, especially when it's small. We walked in a little late. All eyes turned just for a second, then turned away again. No one rushed to greet us, and that was okay. I took a deep breath and smiled at Nova. She smiled back, missing her 2 front teeth, her curls tied up with a pink bow. She was excited. That was all that mattered. We walked toward the food table, trying to blend in. I grabbed a small plate, mostly for Nova, and picked out a few chips and a burger bun. Just something to tide her over before we settled at a table to eat what we brought. That's when I heard it. "Look who showed up for free food," said Uncle Marcus, loud enough that everyone nearby could hear. He was sipping from a solo cup, laughing like he just made the joke of the year. I froze, my stomach twisted. I looked at him, waiting for the punchline to soften, but he wasn't joking. Not really. Before I could even react, Shane chimed in, grinning like a kid who'd just gotten permission to bully again. "She can't even feed her own kid. What did you bring, Crumbs?" A couple of people chuckled. Others stayed quiet. No one said anything to stop them. I stood there holding a paper plate with 2 chips on it, feeling like I'd been slapped in front of a crowd. And worse, Nova was right next to me, looking up at me, watching it all unfold. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't even breathe for a moment. I just smiled. That tight, automatic smile you learn when you've been embarrassed so many times to count. I said nothing, just kept walking toward an empty table in the back corner. But Nova didn't follow. She turned around, walked back toward the group. Her little hands dragged one of the folding chairs, scraping loudly across the patio concrete. Everyone turned to look. She climbed on top of the chair, stood tall, and said in her small but clear voice, "My mom doesn't need your food. We brought our own." The air snapped. Silence. Stunned faces. Even Uncle Marcus stopped mid-sip. And in that moment, with my daughter standing on a chair defending me, I felt more seen, more loved, and more powerful than I ever had in my life. That's how it started. That was the moment everything changed. If I'm being honest, I didn't want to go. When my mom first sent out the family group text, "Barbecue at our place Sunday, bring the kids," I stared at it for almost 10 minutes before I even responded. Not because I didn't miss people I did, but because I already knew how it would feel walking in like the odd one out, like everyone would be silently measuring how far I'd fallen since the last time they saw me. That's the thing about family. They remember who you used to be, and they don't always know what to do when you're not that person anymore. My name's Elra. I'm 32, and I'm a mom. A real one. The kind that survives on 2 hours of sleep, microwaved coffee, and a running to-do list that never ends. I used to be married. I used to have a stable life, a nice house, health insurance. I used to post pictures on Facebook that made people say, "Wow, you're really doing well." And then it all fell apart. When my husband left with no warning, no apology, no interest in staying involved, it was like someone flipped a switch. One day I was a wife, the next I was a single mom scrambling to keep the lights on. He stopped sending money after the 2nd month. "I'm figuring things out," he texted once. That was the last time I heard from him. I work 2 jobs now, morning shifts at a bakery and evenings waitressing at a small Mexican restaurant downtown. I sleep about 5 hours a night, and I haven't had a day off in 7 weeks. But I'm raising my daughter. I'm showing her what strength looks like, even when I feel like breaking. That's why it took me so long to say yes to the barbecue. I didn't want Nova to see me shrink in front of our family. I didn't want her to feel like we were less than. But Nova's heart is bigger than mine. She kept asking, "Can we please go, Mom? I want to play with my cousins. I want to see Grandma." I couldn't say no. She was so excited when I told her we'd go. She helped me make peanut butter and honey sandwiches the night before, carefully wrapping each one in foil and stacking them in our little picnic basket. "That way we don't have to take too much from the food table," she said, like she understood at just 8 years old the weight I was carrying. We didn't have the money to bring a casserole or a dessert platter like everyone else, but I made some fresh fruit. We made a salad with what we had in the fridge: strawberries, a banana, and half an apple. It wasn't impressive, but it was ours, and that mattered to me. When we pulled up to my parents' house, the driveway was already full. I parked down the street and adjusted Nova's bow before we got out. She wore her favorite dress, the blue one with the tiny flowers, and held my hand the whole walk up. My parents' backyard was packed. My mom had gone all out, renting tables, colorful tablecloths, and balloons tied to the fence. The grill was already fired up. I saw Uncle Marcus holding court near the beer cooler, laughing too loud as always. Shane stood near him, flipping a football between his hands, talking to one of his old high school friends. My sister-in-law Tanya was taking selfies with the baby. I stood at the edge of it all for a second, taking it in. Everyone looked full, busy, smiling like they hadn't missed us at all. I gave Nova a little nudge. "Let's say hi, sweetheart." She nodded and skipped ahead, her curls bouncing. Walking in, I felt like I was entering a place I used to belong to but didn't anymore. It was like the family had kept spinning without us and I wasn't sure where I fit in now. I hoped just for a few hours we could blend in, just laugh a little, eat something, and let Nova play. I didn't know, not yet, how quickly it would go wrong or how that tiny picnic basket would become the symbol of everything we were and everything we didn't need from them. We made our way to the food table, trying to stay low-key like guests who were grateful to be included. Nova kept looking around, smiling at her cousins who were already deep into a game of tag. She asked if she could join them, and I told her to go ahead. But before she ran off, she looked at me and whispered, "Are you okay, Mom?" That simple question, so full of awareness, hit harder than I expected. I just smiled and nodded. I stayed near the folding tables, scanning the trays and slow cookers filled with the usual family staples: baked mac and cheese, barbecue ribs, potato salad, deviled eggs, and a towering dessert table with enough sugar to send every kid home bouncing off the walls. It smelled like comfort and familiarity. It smelled like every summer I'd grown up in. For a second, I felt like maybe I had been wrong to be nervous. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad. I picked up a small paper plate, not planning to load it. Just a few chips and a hot dog bun for Nova until we could sit down with our sandwiches. I was reaching for the tongs when I heard the voice I knew would ruin everything. "Well, look who finally made it," Uncle Marcus said, loud. Always loud. I looked up, forcing a polite smile. "Hey, Uncle Marcus." He raised his plastic cup and smirked. "Didn't think we'd see you unless there was free food involved." The smile dropped before I could stop it. My hand froze midair over the chips. A few people nearby looked over. I felt the heat rush to my cheeks. Maybe he thought it was funny. Maybe he really believed. Either way, it stung. I let out a short laugh, trying to brush it off. Then Shane chimed in, "I mean, it's not like she can feed her own kid, right? What did you bring? Half a sandwich and a prayer." The laughter came quickly. Not from everyone, just enough. My cousin Theo chuckled behind his drink. Aunt Monique shook her head but didn't say a word. My mom glanced over, clearly heard it, but just kept arranging cupcakes on the dessert tray. I wanted to disappear. I wasn't expecting kindness, but I wasn't expecting cruelty either. Not like that. Not with my daughter a few feet away. Not when I was already doing everything I could to hold it all together. I turned around, trying to steady my hands, suddenly very aware of the plastic plate in my grip. It felt ridiculous, pitiful, like a begging bowl. I walked toward the corner table we'd spotted when we came in, the one by the fence near the garden. I could feel ice following me like heat on the back of my neck. When I sat down, I couldn't even eat. I just stared at the 2 sandwiches in our basket and the fruit I'd so carefully packed. My stomach twisted. Maybe they were right. Maybe I didn't belong here anymore. Not as the divorced one. Not as the broke one. Not as the single mom who couldn't bring more than a child's lunchbox to a feast. Nova walked back over, her cheeks flushed from running around. "Did you get food?" she asked, excited, until she noticed my face. Her voice softened. "What happened?" I shook my head. "It's nothing, baby. Let's just eat what we brought, okay?" She looked at the food table, then looked back at me. She didn't say anything right away, but I could tell something had shifted in her. The playful energy in her eyes had turned sharp, focused. She turned and walked away without saying another word. I assumed she was going back to play. I took a bite of the sandwich, forcing myself to chew, pretending I wasn't crying inside. I didn't know what she was doing until I heard the scraping of a chair across the patio. I looked up. Nova had pulled one of the folding chairs from the long food table to the center of the backyard. She climbed up on it. Her face was red, her hands were clenched, and her little voice rang out stronger than I'd ever heard it before. "My mom doesn't need your food. We brought our own." And just like that, everything stopped. For a second, I didn't move. I couldn't. My body went completely still, like I'd been frozen in place. The sound of Nova's voice hit me harder than anything my family had said. Not because it hurt, but because it cut through the noise, cut through the shame, and demanded attention in a way I never had the courage to do. Everyone turned to look. Conversations dropped. The sizzle of the grill, the buzzing of flies, even the background music seemed to fade under the weight of her words. There she was, my 8-year-old daughter, standing on a folding chair in the middle of our family's backyard barbecue. Her little hands clenched at her sides, her chin lifted high. She didn't smile. She wasn't asking for attention. She was giving it a message, a line in the sand. "My mom doesn't need your food," she said again, slower this time. "We brought our own." That chair might as well have been a stage. And for the first time all day, all those big loud voices fell completely silent. Shane looked stunned. His stupid smirk faded. Uncle Marcus chuckled awkwardly and shifted his weight from one foot to the other. No one knew what to say. Maybe they thought it was funny. Maybe they were embarrassed. But no one interrupted her. No one dared. Nova looked around the yard, scanning the faces of grown-ups who'd just watched her mother be shamed for doing her best. Her eyes landed back on me, and in that moment, I saw her as more than just my daughter. I saw her as a protector, a mirror, a child who understood what dignity looked like even before she knew the word for it. I stood up. My legs felt like jelly, but I walked toward her. As I reached for her hand, she climbed down from the chair like it was just something she had to do. Nothing dramatic, nothing planned, just right. She looked up at me and whispered, "Are we leaving?" I shook my head. "No, we're eating our food." And that's exactly what we did. We went back to our little table in the corner of the yard, unfolded our napkins, unwrapped our sandwiches, and ate. The fruit salad was warm by then, the sandwiches slightly squished from the walk, but it was the best meal I'd had in months. Not because of the food, but because of what it meant. Across the yard, conversations started up again slowly, hesitantly, but the energy had changed. Nobody made another comment. No one laughed at us anymore. Some people looked over now and then, curiosity or guilt in their eyes. A few avoided looking at us entirely. I saw my mom look from us to Uncle Marcus and then back again. She didn't say anything, but I caught a flicker of something in her face. Maybe shame, maybe realization, maybe regret. I didn't know, and I didn't need to. Nova sat with her legs crossed, eating and chatting like nothing had happened, like standing up in front of the whole family wasn't a big deal. She offered me one of the juice boxes and said, "Next time we can bring cookies too. You make good ones." I nodded. My throat was tight. I couldn't speak without breaking. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not just pride, though I felt it so fiercely I thought my chest might burst, but something deeper, a kind of clarity, a kind of quiet knowing that I didn't owe anyone an explanation for the life I was building. For so long I had let other people's opinions weigh on me. I'd let shame follow me into rooms like a shadow. I'd felt the need to justify, to explain, to prove that I was trying, that I wasn't lazy or failing or broken. But my daughter didn't need proof. She already knew. That moment, her on that chair, her words carrying more strength than any adult in that yard, became the turning point. Just of the day, but of something bigger. It made me see myself through her eyes, not as someone barely scraping by, but as someone who never stopped showing up, even when it was hard. She didn't stand up because I told her to. She stood up because she saw something wrong and believed it should be made right. That's how you know when you're raising someone strong. And that's when I knew I didn't have to shrink anymore. I didn't have to eat my lunch in the corner like I was lucky just to be there. I was there because I belonged. Because we both did. As we sat there at that weathered plastic table with our slightly soggy sandwiches and warm fruit salad, something inside me felt different. Not louder, not braver, just still, like my bones had finally unclenched after holding tension for too long. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. I didn't have to prove I was trying hard enough or defend the choices I'd made to survive. Nova had already done what I couldn't. She made it impossible for anyone in that backyard to ignore what had just happened and, more importantly, why it mattered. I watched her eat, swinging her legs beneath the chair, happily humming to herself, her pink bow tilted slightly from dragging the chair across the patio. She didn't seem burdened or embarrassed. She seemed proud and free, like she'd done what needed to be done and now she could just enjoy her sandwich in peace. And me? I was still trying to wrap my head around it. That tiny voice of shame inside me was quieter now. That voice that always said, "You're not doing enough. You don't belong here. You're the failure in the family." That voice that had followed me into every family event since the divorce. It wasn't gone, but it had been knocked off its pedestal. Nova had taken that voice and kicked it in the teeth with a single sentence. Across the yard, Uncle Marcus was suddenly a lot less chatty. He was still near the cooler, but he wasn't holding court anymore. Shane had walked off with his football, throwing it to himself like he needed to be somewhere, anywhere else. A few relatives gave me glances I couldn't quite read. Some looked awkward, others seemed quietly impressed. And one, my Aunt Renee, actually came over. She didn't say much. She just walked up to the table, placed 2 bottled waters in front of us, and said, "She's got guts, just like her mama." I blinked. "Thank you." Then she walked away just as quietly as she'd come. I looked at the 2 waters and smiled. Maybe it was small, but it felt like a peace offering, like someone had finally seen the full picture instead of just judging the frame. We finished eating in the shade, not rushed, not anxious. Nova told me about the game she was playing earlier and asked if we could make our fruit salad again next weekend. She said next time she'd add blueberries because they taste like summer. I kept nodding and smiling, but my mind was racing. Not in a chaotic way, more like the fog was clearing for the first time in forever. I kept thinking about how long I'd kept my head down, how many family gatherings I'd skipped just to avoid the looks, the questions, the subtle digs disguised as jokes. And yet here we were. We'd come, we'd stood our ground, and we were still standing. Later, as people started packing up the balloons wilting in the heat, the grill turned off, kids slurping the last of their sodas, my mom came over. She didn't mention what had happened, not directly. She just looked at Nova, smoothed a curl behind her ear, and said, "You're a brave girl." Nova looked up at her and replied, "She's brave too," pointing at me. It took everything in me not to cry right there. My mom gave me a look I hadn't seen in a while. Not pity, not concern, something closer to respect, maybe even pride. Then she nodded once and turned to help Dad with the folding chairs. We didn't stay much longer. As we walked back to the car, Nova held my hand tight. "Did I do something bad?" she asked suddenly. I stopped and knelt in front of her. "No, baby, you did something very good. You stood up for someone you love and you weren't afraid." She smiled, satisfied. "Okay." When we got home, I unpacked the leftovers, tucked her into bed, and sat on the couch in silence. I thought about the shame I had carried for years, how heavy it had been, how much space it had taken up in my life. But that night it felt lighter. Because now, every time that shame tried to creep back in, I could picture her standing tall on that plastic chair, her voice cutting through the noise like a spark in dry grass. And I'd remember I wasn't the problem, their cruelty was. And my daughter, she was the answer. It's been a few weeks since that barbecue, but I still think about it every day. Not the way my uncle laughed or the way my brother smirked, not even the silence that followed when they realized they'd been called out by an 8-year-old. What plays over and over in my mind is the moment my daughter climbed that chair without hesitation, without permission, and used her voice when I couldn't find mine. That memory lives in my chest now like armor. I wish I could say everything changed after that day, that my family apologized, that old wounds were magically healed. But life isn't a movie. Some people stayed quiet. Some avoided me even more. My brother hasn't texted. Uncle Marcus hasn't looked me in the eye since. But that's okay because I changed. I didn't realize how deeply I had internalized their opinions of me, how much power I'd given their judgments. I'd spent years hiding behind the idea that I had to earn my seat at the table, that I had to be perfect to be welcome, that because I didn't have money or a husband or stability that looked like theirs, I didn't count. But that day shattered the illusion. I wasn't weak, I wasn't pitiful. I was doing what mothers do. I was showing up even when it was hard. And my daughter saw that. She saw me, not the way I saw myself in the mirror. After crying in the car, not the way I imagined my family saw me, scraping by, barely managing. But the way she saw me was enough, brave, worth standing up for. Since then, I've stopped apologizing for my life. I still work 2 jobs. I still pack sandwiches instead of ordering takeout. I still have days when I feel tired down to my bones. But I hold my head higher now. I don't let shame ride in the passenger seat anymore. That barbecue was the first time I saw my daughter become her own kind of protector, not just of me but of what's right. And it taught me something I'll never forget. You don't have to be big to be powerful. You just have to be willing to speak up when it matters. Nova and I laugh about it sometimes. She says, "Remember when I stood on that chair like a boss?" And I say, "Yeah, you taught everyone a lesson that day." She always grins and goes, "They should have just been nice." Simple and true. I've started showing up to more family events, not to prove anything, just because I want to. Nova deserves cousins and cookouts, and I deserve to exist without explaining myself. I don't hover at the edges of rooms anymore. I don't shrink when I walk in. I bring what I can, I hold my ground, and I sit wherever I want. I've noticed some relatives treat me differently now. Maybe they're still uncomfortable, or maybe they respect me more, but I don't look for their approval anymore. That's the biggest change. I stopped asking people who don't live my life to validate the way I live it. And honestly, I found peace in that. What I hope people take from this, if you've ever been in my shoes, feeling invisible or judged or like your story makes people uncomfortable, is that your worth isn't up for debate. You don't owe anyone a performance of perfection to deserve dignity. You're not defined by your income or your marital status or how much you brought to the potluck. You are defined by how you love, how you show up, how you keep going. And sometimes, if you're lucky, someone you love will remind you of that when you forget. Nova reminded me that day, not with a hug or a pep talk or even quiet support. She reminded me with action, with conviction. She reminded me that I was doing enough, that I was enough. She didn't save me because I wasn't broken, but she helped me see that I'd been living like I was. Now, when I pack her lunch or tie her shoes or walk into a room filled with people who once made me feel small, I carry that moment with me. I carry her strength, and I let it remind me of my own, because sometimes the smallest voice in the room is the one that changes everything. And on that day at that barbecue, my daughter didn't just defend me, she gave me back to myself. So if you've ever felt like the black sheep at your own family table, if you've ever been looked down on for struggling or silenced when you were already doing your best, just remember this: you don't need their approval to know your worth. You don't need their food to feel full. Sometimes strength doesn't sound like shouting. Sometimes it's an 8-year-old girl standing on a chair telling the truth. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of your own strength or someone else's, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment. I'd love to know, has anyone ever stood up for you in a moment you couldn't stand up for yourself? If you want more real, raw, and honest stories like this, subscribe to the channel. This is a space for truth, for healing, and for remembering that our voices, no matter how small, can shake the room. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being.